The Summer of Wi-Fi and Wisdom. Chapter 1. The Emergency. The phone call came at 7 in the morning, which is never a good sign. I was already awake. At our age, sleeping past 6 feels like a waste of daylight. But Diane was still enjoying her extra hour. She claims she needs it to maintain her youthful glow. Though I've pointed out we're both 73, so the ship on youth has rather sailed. Dad? It was our daughter Elizabeth, and she sounded frantic. I need the most enormous favor. I braced myself. The last time Elizabeth needed an enormous favor, we ended up fostering a 3-legged cat named Captain Fluffington for 6 months. He destroyed 2 sofas and my favorite reading chair. Richard's been asked to lead the Melbourne expansion project, and I've got that archaeological dig in Peru that's been approved for funding. Remember I told you about it? I didn't remember, but I made an affirmative noise. The thing is, it's all happening at once, and it's for 8 weeks, and we can't take the kids, and summer camps are all full, and you want us to look after Milo and Zoe, I finished. Would you? Please? I know it's a lot, but they're 12 and 15 now, practically self-sufficient, and I nearly laughed at that. Self-sufficient. Our granddaughter Zoe couldn't make toast without consulting YouTube. And Milo still couldn't tie his shoelaces properly. But they were good kids. If somewhat alien to me in their habits and interests. Let me talk to your mother, I said. Which is what I always say when I need someone else to make the decision. Diane took it surprisingly well. 8 weeks? In our house? With our things? She looked around our pristine living room, where everything had its place and had kept that place since 1987. Well, I suppose it could be lovely. When did we last have young energy in this house? When the carpet fitters came in 2003, and they scratched the banister. She swatted my arm. Don't be such a pessimist, Arthur. It'll be an adventure. That's what worried me. At 73, I'd had quite enough adventures, thank you very much. Chapter 2. The Arrival. They arrived on a Sunday with enough luggage for a year-long expedition. Zoe emerged from the car first. A 15-year-old with purple streaks in her hair, and her eyes already glued to her phone. She looked up briefly, said, "Hey Grandma, hey Grandpa," then returned to her screen while walking, somehow not tripping over anything. It was like watching someone with a sixth sense. Milo tumbled out next, all gangly 12-year-old limbs and enthusiasm. "Grandpa Arthur. Do you have Wi-Fi? What's the password? Can I set up my gaming console? Do you have a good router? What's your internet speed?" I understood perhaps 3 of those questions. Elizabeth and Richard looked exhausted already, and they hadn't even left yet. "Thank you so much for doing this," Elizabeth said, hugging Diane tightly. "There's a folder with all their schedules, dietary preferences, emergency contacts." "Dietary preferences?" I echoed. "When you were their age, your dietary preference was whatever's on the table. Times have changed, Dad. Milo's trying to reduce his carbon footprint, so he's mostly vegetarian now. And Zoe's very particular about organic." "I'm not particular," Zoe interjected, looking up from her phone. "I just don't want to eat pesticides." "It's not weird." "Of course not, darling," Diane said smoothly. "We'll figure it all out." After 45 minutes of instructions, tearful hugs, and Milo asking twice more about the Wi-Fi password, our daughter and son-in-law finally left. Diane and I stood in the driveway with our grandchildren, feeling rather like we'd just agreed to house sit for a pair of exotic creatures we didn't quite know how to feed. "Right then," I said. "Who wants tea?" Both children looked at me like I'd suggested we sacrifice a goat. "Do you have oat milk?" Zoe asked. "We have milk from cows," I replied. "It's been working for thousands of years." Zoe sighed the sigh of the terminally oppressed. "Grandpa, the dairy industry is incredibly harmful to the environment. Not to mention the treatment of the cows. I'll put the kettle on, Diane said quickly. And we'll sort something out. Chapter 3. The Great Wi-Fi Crisis. The first major crisis occurred within 3 hours. I was in my study, trying to read the Sunday paper in peace. Actual paper, mind you, not on some screen. When Milo burst in looking genuinely panicked. Grandpa, the Wi-Fi isn't working. It was working 10 minutes ago. It's so slow. I'm trying to download a game update and it says it'll take 4 hours. 4 hours? How do you live like this? I peered over my reading glasses. Quite contentedly, usually. Can we upgrade your internet? Please? I'll pay for it from my allowance. I nearly choked on my tea. You want to pay to upgrade my internet? Our internet, Diane corrected, appearing in the doorway. And actually, Arthur, the young man at the shop did say we could get faster speeds when we were in last month. Remember? I did not remember, but I was outnumbered. By Tuesday, a very cheerful technician named Bradley had installed something called fiber optic broadband. And both children looked at me like I'd personally invented electricity. This is amazing, Milo said. His game downloading at speeds I couldn't comprehend. You can actually stream things now. In HD. I've been streaming the BBC perfectly well, I muttered. But no one was listening. The funny thing was, once we had this super-powered internet, Diane discovered something called Netflix. By Wednesday evening, I found her in the living room with Zoe. Both of them engrossed in some program about people making pottery. It's very soothing, Diane explained. And Zoe's been teaching me how to use the apps. There are different categories, Grandpa, Zoe explained. Actually making eye contact for the first time since arrival. Like, you can find all the documentaries about history and stuff. Grandma said you like World War II history? There's loads on here. Despite myself, I sat down. 3 hours later, we'd watched 2 episodes of a documentary series I'd never have found on regular television. And I had to admit, grudgingly, that perhaps there was something to this modern technology after all. Chapter 4. The Cooking Negotiations. The kitchen became our primary battleground. Diane has always been a traditional cook. Roasts on Sunday, fish on Friday, vegetables boiled to within an inch of their lives. It's how we were raised, and it served us perfectly well. Milo had other ideas. Grandma, this broccoli has been murdered. He announced at dinner the first week, poking at the pale green florets on his plate. I'll have you know I've been cooking broccoli this way for 50 years, Diane said. Though I could see she was fighting a smile. Can I show you something? Milo asked. Like? Not in a disrespectful way. But there's this method where you roast it with garlic and olive oil, and it gets all crispy and it's actually really good. I expected Diane to dismiss this. But instead she said, all right then, tomorrow you can show me. This started what Milo called cooking school. Every few days, he'd teach Diane a new recipe from YouTube. Roasted vegetables that actually had flavor. Stir fries that weren't soggy. Something called a Buddha bowl that looked like confusion in a dish but tasted surprisingly good. The secret is you don't boil everything to death, Milo explained while demonstrating his technique. You want vegetables to have light texture and seasoning. Salt isn't scary, Grandma. I know salt isn't scary, Diane protested. Your grandfather has to watch his blood pressure. There's salt in literally everything he eats anyway, Milo pointed out. You might as well make it taste good. I couldn't argue with that logic. Zoe, meanwhile, took me shopping. We need to check if things are organic, free-range, sustainably sourced, she explained in the supermarket. Reading labels with an intensity I usually reserved for financial documents, In my day, I began, then stopped myself. Sorry, go on. She looked at me suspiciously. You were going to say in your day you just ate whatever was available and were grateful for it, right? Something like that. Yeah, but now we know better. Like, we know that factory farming is bad and pesticides are bad and we can actually make choices that help. She held up 2 packages of chicken. This one is £2 cheaper, but these chickens basically lived in torture. This one costs more but they had, like, an actual life. Which one feels better to buy? Put like that, the choice seemed obvious. By the end of the shopping trip, our bill was higher. But I had to admit I felt better about what we'd purchased. When did you get so thoughtful about these things? I asked as we loaded the car. She shrugged. I don't know. You can't really be on the internet and not know about this stuff. It's everywhere. Plus my friends and I talk about it. We're going to inherit this planet, so we kind of have to care, you know? I did know. And I felt a strange mixture of pride and shame. Pride that her generation was more conscious than mine had been. Shame that we'd left them such a mess to care about. Chapter 5. The Great Technology Exchange. By week 3, we'd settled into a rhythm, though not without some bumps. The biggest shock came when I discovered Zoe posting photographs of our house online. You put our living room on the internet? I asked, horrified. It's just Instagram, Grandpa. I'm not giving out the address or anything. Look. People love it. They think your house is vintage and aesthetic. I peered at her phone, where indeed dozens of people had left comments with small pictures of hearts and fire. What does this one mean? I asked, pointing to an emoji that looked like a skull. Oh, that means they think it's really cool. Like, I'm dead because this is so good. People tell you they're dead to indicate they like something? It's ironic, Grandpa. None of this made any sense, but Zoe was patient. She showed me how Instagram worked, how people shared bits of their lives, how you could follow people who interested you. You should get an account. You could post about your garden. People love gardens. People I don't know want to see my tomatoes? Yes. That's the whole point. I remained skeptical. But later that week, when Milo was playing his video games, I asked if I could watch. He looked so shocked I nearly laughed. You want to watch me play Minecraft? I want to understand what you're spending 6 hours a day doing. He explained it to me. How you built things, explored, survived, created entire worlds with friends from school. It was more complex than I'd expected, requiring planning, resource management, creativity. It's kind of like virtual Lego, he explained. But you can make anything you can imagine. I watched him construct an elaborate castle, working with 3 friends I could hear through his headset. Children I'd never meet who lived in different parts of England, all collaborating on this project together. That's rather clever, I admitted. Want to try? I did try. Though my castle looked more like a confused shed. Milo was encouraging though. That's actually really good for your first go, Grandpa. Here, let me show you how to make the walls taller. Diane found us 2 hours later, both hunched over the screen, debating the best placement for a drawbridge. I can't believe what I'm seeing, she said. Grandpa's actually really good at this, Milo said. He understands the structural stuff better than I do. I glowed with the praise. When was the last time I'd been good at something one of my grandchildren cared about? In exchange, I taught Milo about my workshop in the garage. He'd never used actual tools before. Everything in his life was digital. I showed him how to sand wood, how to measure twice and cut once, how to use a plane to shave precise slivers from a plank. This is so satisfying, he said, running his hand over the smooth wood he'd created. It's like you can actually see what you've done. It exists in real life. That's the pleasure of making things with your hands, I said. Your generation should do more of it. Your generation should do more of the internet stuff, he countered with a grin. It's not all bad, you know. I'm beginning to see that, I admitted. Chapter 6. The Bridge. The turning point came in week 5. Elizabeth called for her weekly check-in, and she sounded stressed. Hi Dad, how's everything going? Are the kids behaving? Are they eating properly? I know they can be picky. They're wonderful, I assured her. I'm teaching Milo woodworking, and Zoe's been helping your mother in the garden. She knows so much about companion planting and natural pest control. Really? Elizabeth sounded surprised. Zoe's been helping in the garden? She never does that at home. Perhaps you never asked her, I said, then immediately regretted it. There was a long pause. Dad, Elizabeth said quietly. Do you think Mum would talk to me? Actually talk? Not just the polite surface stuff we usually do. What do you mean? You know what I mean. Things have been difficult between us since the thing with my wedding. We're always so careful around each other, like we're afraid of saying the wrong thing. But watching Zoe open up to you both, I realize my own daughter is closer to you right now than I've been in years. Ah yes. The wedding. 15 years ago, Elizabeth had married Richard in a registry office with only 4 guests, when Diane had been planning a church wedding for months. They'd barely spoken for a year afterward. Ancient history, I said. Is it though? I want to fix this, Dad. Will you help me? That evening, I found Zoe in the garden, and we had a conversation. Then I had another conversation with Milo. Then Diane and I had a long conversation over our evening whiskey. Her. And brandy. Me. The next time Elizabeth called, Zoe asked to speak to her privately. I don't know exactly what was said, but I heard Zoe's voice through the door. Mum, Grandma's not upset about the wedding anymore. She told me she was just sad she missed seeing you in a wedding dress, but she understands why you did it your way. Maybe you could just talk to her about it? Like actually talk? When Zoe emerged, she looked determined. Right. Your turn, Grandma. Diane went pale. Oh, I couldn't possibly. You both love each other and you're both being ridiculous. Zoe said with the bluntness only a teenager can deliver. Grandpa, back me up. The girl has a point, I said. So Diane took the phone to the garden, and I watched through the window as she had what looked like a very emotional conversation with our daughter. There were tears. There were gestures. There was, eventually, something that looked like understanding. When she came back inside, Diane was red-eyed but smiling. We're going to try and talk more, she said. Really talk. Elizabeth said she never knew I felt that way, and I never knew she felt. Well, it seems we should have done this years ago. Sometimes you need a 15-year-old to point out what the adults are too stubborn to see, I said. Zoe beamed. Chapter 7. The last week. The final week arrived too quickly. We'd grown accustomed to the noise. The music floating down from upstairs. The refrigerator full of exotic plant-based foods. Milo's endless questions. Zoe's commentary on everything from politics to fashion. I don't want you to go, Diane admitted over breakfast one morning. We don't want to go either, Milo said. Can we stay longer? Your parents will be back Sunday, I reminded him. And they'll want to see you. But we've just got you trained properly, Zoe teased. Grandpa's actually on Instagram now. He posted his tomatoes yesterday and got 63 likes. 64, I corrected. Someone liked it this morning. On their last evening, we had a special dinner. Milo and Diane cooked together. A proper roast. He'd learned to appreciate her methods. With properly seasoned roasted vegetables. She'd learned to appreciate his. Zoe and I set the table with the good china, The stuff we hadn't used in years because we were saving it. For what? Zoe had asked. For when the Queen comes to visit? Use the nice things now, Grandpa. That's what they're for. Over dinner, we talked. Really talked. Milo told us about school, about the project he wanted to build in his design class, using the woodworking techniques I'd taught him. Zoe talked about her hopes to study environmental science, maybe work in conservation. You're going to do important things, Diane said. So did you guys, Zoe replied. You just did them differently. But like, Grandpa, you built furniture that people still use 40 years later. That's sustainable. That's brilliant. And Grandma, you've been volunteering at that community center for 20 years. You've helped hundreds of people. That matters. I felt something tight in my chest. When you're old, you worry you've become irrelevant, that the world has moved on without you. These two children had shown us we still had value, even if we didn't understand every new technology or trend. You've taught us things too, Milo added. Like patience. And how to make things last instead of just throwing them away and buying new ones. And that it's okay to just be quiet sometimes. Not everything has to be content for social media. Although your tomatoes definitely are content-worthy, Zoe added. And we all laughed. Sunday came. Elizabeth and Richard looked tan and happy, bursting with stories about Melbourne and Peru. They also looked nervous. So, Elizabeth said, surveying the living room where everything was still in its place despite 8 weeks of occupancy. How did it go? Were they terrible? They were perfect, Diane said firmly. And we've missed you. But we'll miss them too. Mum, Elizabeth said quietly. Can we talk? Properly? In person? I'd like that very much. While they went to the garden. Our garden had become the site of important conversations. Richard helped the kids pack the car. I supervised. Which mostly meant standing there feeling useless. Thank you, Arthur, Richard said. Really? Elizabeth has seemed lighter on the phone these past few weeks. I think having the kids here has been good for everyone. They're good children, I said. You've done well. They clearly love you both very much. Milo came over and hugged me, which surprised me into stillness. Thanks, Grandpa. This was the best summer ever. Can we come back next year? We'll see, I said. My voice rough. You're always welcome. Zoe hugged me too, and pressed a piece of paper into my hand. That's the login details for your Instagram account. Post more tomatoes. Your followers demand it. By the time Elizabeth and Diane emerged from the garden, both with red eyes but genuine smiles, we were all ready for goodbyes. There were promises to video call weekly, to visit at Christmas, to share Diane's recipe for roast potatoes and Milo's method for crispy vegetables. I love you both, Elizabeth said, hugging us tightly. And I'm sorry we've been distant. That's going to change. We stood in the driveway waving as they drove away. And then the house was quiet again. Too quiet. Well, I said eventually. That was something. It was everything, Diane corrected. She took my hand. I think we should get some of that oat milk. I think we should call them more often. I think we should remember that different doesn't mean wrong. I think, I said, pulling her close, we've just had a rather wonderful summer. That night, I posted another photograph on Instagram. The view from our garden at sunset, with the caption, 8 weeks of learning from the young ones. Best teachers I've ever had. Within an hour, I had 87 likes, including one from someone called Zoe the Bee, with a comment that just said, "Love you, Grandpa, green heart." I still didn't really understand why people used small pictures instead of words, but I was beginning to see the appeal. I sent her back a small heart. And then I went to find Diane, who was watching her pottery program on Netflix. "Budge over," I said. And she made room for me on the sofa. We sat there in our living room, which looked exactly the same as it had 8 weeks ago but somehow felt entirely different, and watched people make beautiful things out of clay. Outside, the tomatoes I'd posted about grew quietly in their beds. Upstairs, the good Wi-Fi hummed along, ready for our next video call. In the morning, I'd start building a new project in the workshop. A special box for Milo, using the techniques we'd learned together. Diane had already ordered seeds for the companion plant Zoe had suggested. We had Elizabeth's phone call to look forward to on Tuesday, when we'd really talk, not just exchange pleasantries. The world was changing, had changed, would keep changing. But some things remained constant. Family. Love. The willingness to learn from each other across the years that separated us. "You know," Diane said, "I think we should invite them back next summer." "I think we should," I agreed. I haven't finished teaching Milo about dovetail joints. And Zoe wanted to start a compost bin. We smiled at each other. Two old people who'd just discovered they weren't quite as old as they'd thought. We'd learned to stream television, to roast vegetables properly, to use Instagram, to talk about things that mattered. We'd learned that you could teach respect for the past while embracing the future. That tradition and innovation weren't enemies but partners. Most importantly, we'd learned that every generation has something to teach and something to learn. You just have to be willing to listen. Outside, the sun set on the summer. Inside, we were already planning for next year.